Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. A real pleasure to have you here with us in Cannes. Thanks so much for taking the time. Huge congratulations on the film. For people who haven't seen it yet, though, can you give us a brief introduction to $6 billion Man?
Yeah, The $6 Billion Man is a film about, well, it's about a lot of things, but it's about Julian Assange and the price of truth. That's the subtitle. For people who don't know Julian Assange created something called WikiLeaks. For people who do, this will be a brief refresher, but WikiLeaks was an organization, and still is, that allows whistleblowers in organizations, whether government or corporations, to share with the public information that they feel the public needs to know that may concern public safety or human rights or some other area of deep concern, and to do so anonymously. Historically, whistleblowers, when they wanted to tell the public something that was going on behind the scenes, they had to take great risks and go to a parking garage and meet somebody and give them a briefcase in a dark moment of the night. And that was great. It was rather perilous to do and frightening to do, and so not so many people did it. What WikiLeaks saw was an opportunity, and the person who saw it was Julian Assange, to bring technology to bear, that in the digital age, you could enable people to upload damning information, exposing information about their organization to the world, and to do it anonymously. And that anonymity would encourage people to come out of the shadows and tell us all more of what we need to know about our world. It's no secret that the world is spinning out of control for a lot of us right now. We're very frightened by climate change. We're very frightened by the rise of what feels like fascism in the world. We're very frightened by wars and the possibility of world war and other forms of terrible abuse. We see what's happening in Gaza as a kind of a horrifying warning sign of what man's inhumanity to man can be. You see women and children being starved and compelled into drought. And I think when we see all that, we want to know about what's going on in our world. And WikiLeaks tried to help us know that. They exposed some secrets about the U.S. government's crimes in Iraq and elsewhere. And for that, the U.S. government set about to destroy Julian Assange and to destroy WikiLeaks. And he became the $6 billion man. That's the bounty they put on his head to destroy him over a 15-year period. But the good news is they lost, and they failed to destroy him, and he's a free man now. And how that happened is an exciting story.
And of course, Julian Assange is one of those names that I think everyone's read, heard of at some point on their journey, but maybe don't really know the detail of the story. Why was now the right time to perhaps go back and retell it? I guess maybe the moment when he was freed, did that just spark in your mind? We need to go back and really analyze what on earth happened here.
We had been making the film for several years before he was freed. So I was making a film about a man in jail, and I thought I was investigating the case of Julian Assange to understand, why is this man in jail? Why is there a pressure to extradite him to America, where he might face 175 years in a maximum security prison? He's currently sitting in Belmarsh prison, which was a maximum security prison in London, Britain's Guantanamo Bay, they call it. And I wondered, what is he doing there, and how did we get here? And in the investigation of that, we were going along when one day suddenly he was free. But the reason the film is coming out now is that the full story of Julian Assange can now be understood by the public. The public was victimized by a great deal of propaganda by those in power who choreographed much of what we knew about Julian Assange, much of what I knew. I knew very little of what I came to know in investigating this, and what I came to discover blew my mind, and I needed to share it with audiences, of the lengths that the United States would go to destroy a person who, after all, was seeking to do nothing other than hold a mirror up to the United States. That is how scared they are of looking at themselves in the mirror.
And I guess in some respects, it does kind of follow the beats of a traditional documentary. But then at other times, we feel like we're in this kind of high stakes thriller. So maybe you can talk a bit about the form it takes. And I wonder if it's perhaps because at a lot of moments, the story is kind of stranger than, when fact is stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
So maybe, like, are we in a James Bond movie? Kind of, is that what sort of led you to kind of take this form on in this way?
Yes, I mean, as we started to investigate, the thing became more and more Bourne Identity every day, more and more of a spy thriller every day. And, that was exciting, and I knew it would make for a really exciting movie, but I also am I'm also there to pursue the truth. It's not fiction. And so what we really found was that this is a nonfiction film with all of the power of a spy thriller. And how often do you get that if you're a movie maker? So it's very fortunate for me. And then the goal was to not get carried away with it, let it be exciting, let it be a spy thriller, but coming out of the true events. And this is a rare case where the true events were larger than life. And they made, they felt like scripted drama, even though, there are things in this film where you just can't make this shit up. And I couldn't believe, Julian Assange was spied on illegally inside the Ecuadorian embassy in London by a team of spies who were ultimately being coordinated out of a Las Vegas casino owned by Sheldon Adelson, a giant donor to the Republican Party, and that at some point the fruits of that spying operation were funneled to the CIA so that Julian Assange, if he ever got to an American courtroom, would not have attorney-client privilege because they'd been eavesdropping on his lawyer meetings. Somebody get me the guy who wrote Born Identity and in here and let him write a draft, It was extremely exciting, and just the fact that it was true makes it also harrowing.
I guess perhaps, admittedly my own ignorance, but there were so many things that I realized I hadn't actually known the detail on. I think for me, in the sort of opening scenes where you show that footage that they got from Iraq, where they gunned down the people in the square, that is just so powerful. And I guess it just sets the scene for this whole context, which is, it's so black and white that's, there was no gray area, that was some, evil thing that happened there that needed to be exposed. So what made you decide to put that up front and center of the film?
I think it's the starting point for people to understand the impact that WikiLeaks and Julian Assange had on the world and on the U.S. government. When the U.S. government saw that footage of a murder of civilians and journalists by U.S. personnel that had been covered up and washed away and not investigated, and no one had been punished. When they saw the world see that, they understood that they had an enemy in Julian Assange. They had an enemy in WikiLeaks, and they went after them. And then WikiLeaks, as it turned out, wasn't a one-trick pony. They planned to continue, and they had a lot more material to release, and they kept releasing. And as they kept releasing, phones started ringing in Washington to destroy this person, to destroy this operation, that it wasn't a small one-off event. And that's when you saw the real beginnings of the $6 billion campaign that ultimately culminates in the torture and illegal surveillance of Julian Assange many years later. The fact that it all leads to that is, the U.S. had committed crimes that WikiLeaks revealed. Then they committed crimes to put Julian Assange away in an embassy and kind of neutralize him in that way. And just the way you would use that word in a spy thriller, they neutralized him, or tried to, putting him in that embassy. And then once he was in that embassy, they added insult to injury by deepening the mistreatment of Julian Assange along totally illegal lines. And you had to tell that to the public.
Do you think it also just, if anyone did have a doubt in their mind about, the role of WikiLeaks and kind of their mission, I feel like when you watch that footage, it's harder to kind of argue with it. It feels quite definitive that that is something that the world should know.
Yeah, and it's also a cautionary tale. We see footage like that every day now in places like Gaza and Ukraine and elsewhere. And so we have become numb to the cost of human life. And I think America has a great stain in its history in having, during the Iraq War, during the War on Terror, the campaign in Afghanistan, really warped the rules of war, warped regard for human dignity, warped the institutions that are supposed to protect human dignity. The U.S. conducted an all-out campaign of impeachment against the United Nations for doing what? For trying to slow the United States down from what? A war that actually deeply damaged America, along with everything else that it damaged. And so I think America would have done very well to listen to Julian Assange and listen to the people who were against that war and saw in that footage indications of a world gone very wrong and an America gone very wrong. And instead, the way political forces shape the world and the way they drink their own Kool-Aid, they instead formed a camp mentality of making a villain out of the messenger rather than letting the villain, as they called it, show a mirror up to them that would have revealed them to themselves.
And there's such a kind of patchwork, if you like, of all these different elements and the different bits of footage, the talking heads, kind of never seen before footage of WikiLeaks in its sort of nascent stages. I mean, what was it like going through all of this material, and how on earth do we even begin to decide what ends up in the final movie?
Maddening, but also very exciting, and I'm very gratified to say that I have an amazing team of people, young people who are deeply committed to truth and to watching all of the footage and getting the best moments out of it, and finding these incredible moments of humanity in the footage and of revelation. You know, our job is to reveal and shed light. And I'm very, very, very lucky to have a team around me who go really to the ends of the earth for that.
In terms of the things that maybe shocked you that you found, I mean, some things were just so bizarre. I mean, where they're having to like smuggle in the baby into the, into the, you know, and like you say, when he's paranoid, but actually it turns out to be true that he's being listened in on.
Yeah, that's what Pamela Anderson points out in the film. And I thought Pamela's relationship with him was remarkable, and makes, you know, Pamela Anderson, who the world has really come to understand as such a substantive person with so much texture to her and such a profound care for the human story, that she becomes such a friend to Julian in the film. Everyone thought they were lovers, but, you know, men and women can actually be friends. And Pamela reminds us of that, while also telling us how Julian was aware before anybody else that something seemed like it was fishy in the embassy, the very place that he was supposed to be safe. He started to doubt whether he was really safe there. Turned out he was right. But at the time, people said he was paranoid. And Pamela admits that even she thought he was paranoid.
And you don't kind of shy away, though, either from, you know, Julian's kind of eccentricities, or, you know, he didn't always behave, you know, like an angel. And, you know, there are sort of elements of his character which are kind of non-conventional. So how did you kind of want to maybe balance, in a way, a bit of a character study of him as a person with these much bigger, broader themes about journalistic, you know, freedom and freedom of speech?
The whole cult of the individual, which is a real problem in modern life. You know, most of history has been guided by small groups of people working hard in communities to try to make things better. Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of people, properly organized, can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And yet we idolize these individuals. We make them heroes and villains and simplistic kind of stick figures for our own convenience, for making things simple for ourselves. So it was my sense that the U.S. government had made a villain out of Julian Assange, like Dr. Evil, basically. Saturday Night Live has a Bill Hader imitation of Julian Assange, where Hader comes on and your TV gets all snowy and looks all messed up. And then he says, Bill Hader comes on and says, "Hello, America. I'm Julian Assange, and I've interrupted your airwaves to blank, blank, blank." And he plays Dr. Evil, basically. And they made Julian into Dr. Evil. Well, that's propaganda. That's a smear campaign. That's meant to make us all think badly about someone that we might actually think is doing something really good for humanity. But they're very clever, and they know how to get at the jugular. So they made him into Dr. Evil. So what's my job? To say that he's an angel? No, that wouldn't be realistic. He's a human being, but he's probably not Dr. Evil either. So that's been what we've been trying to get across.
Another one part of the film and the story is that feels a bit like something out of a movie is the teenager.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that moment very early on. It says, you know, "Oh, there's a video of you shooting your friend," and he's like, "Yeah, don't you do that?" I don't know. What was it like interviewing him and having that part of the story in there?
The character known as Teenager, and he's called Teenager in the U.S. indictment against Julian Assange because he became the lead witness in the U.S. case against Julian Assange, and ultimately in our film reveals that the United States was lying in their case against Julian Assange. That figure is a remarkable character in his own right, and I'll leave it to people to see the film and discover why we're talking about him. He's a real force of nature, and I think you have to witness him firsthand to really start to understand where he's coming from and the role he played in the Assange saga.
You know, obviously, it's pretty harrowing, you know, the way you sort of lay it out, just how corrupt our world really is, and, you know, actually how much we are going in an even worse direction. Yes. But there is just this glimmer or hint of hope at the end, you know, this sort of younger journalist saying, you know, "I'm not going to stop fighting, I'm not going to stop writing." And, you know, the other people from WikiLeaks saying we need to pass the baton on to the next generation. Do you want your film, in a way, to be a wake-up call and a bit of a call to arms, rather than something that maybe can make people feel apathetic?
Yes.
And what have you found the response being so far? What are you expecting here in Cannes?
I don't say more than yes to the question of whether it should be a wake-up call. Because if somebody is meant to wake up, don't you just say wake up and then it's up to them? If you just keep talking, then they can stay in bed, can't they? So it should be a wake-up call.
And what has it meant to you to have the film here in Cannes? What a platform for your film.
Very much, and we won a Golden Globe Award here last night, which is a shock. Golden Globe has never given an award to a documentary before, and the fact that Cannes is hosting films like mine and the several other films here that are all quite political is very impressive and a very important shift for the festival. It's not a shift for France. France has always been a very good conscience for the world. They've always, for example, been a big brother to America, telling us when we have gone to excesses like the Iraq War and things like that. So it's consistent, I think, with the role that France plays in the world, that the Cannes Film Festival should allow itself to be more of a political platform for films that do try to take on some of the central and key issues that we face in the world, and I see that happening. Very proud to be part of that, and very proud that the Golden Globes have decided to join forces with Cannes to single out documentaries in that way, and to have received that award was a big deal for us here, and very big deal for the subject as well. I know Julian was very proud of it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all that
Thank
with me.
you.
Huge congrats
Thank you
on the
very
award
much.
and having the film here. And I can't wait for everyone else to see it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.